Welcome to Chico, California Steaks webcast Life Sketches. I'm Melanie McLaughlin, and today we're visiting with Tomas Loarca. Thank you so much for coming to talk with us. Appreciate it. Will you start out by telling us a little bit about your family, your wife and kids?
Yeah, I have my wife here that we live together, and we have 6 kids, and the age ranges are 8 months to almost 14, and then they're about every 2 years there. About. Yeah.
Did you two plan on having 6 kids?
No, I don't think so. I think when we talked about it, maybe 3 or 4, 5, my wife had a bigger family, and I had a smaller family. And now here we are at 6, so maybe we'll have 7, 8, 9, 10. I don't know.
Okay.
That's what people think. You're going to keep having babies, right? And it's like, I don't know. Everyone asks us that, though. So I think that's a funny question that people ask. They want to know
how many kids you're going to have.
They want to know that. So maybe they want to buy some gifts or something. I'm not sure.
Maybe they're envious of
maybe
how much fun you guys have in your family.
Mm-hmm. We do sometimes.
So you've had, so you said from 6 months to almost 14.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that you have a favorite developmental stage in your kids so far?
I thought you were going to say, do I have a favorite kid, is what I thought you were going to say.
Oh, no, I wouldn't ask that.
I bet all the kids would say the other kids are their favorites.
Uh-huh.
But, developmental stage, they're all pretty fun in their own right. So right now, my 2 oldest are into music, so we have that to share. So the younger ones like music, but it's not the same. But the youngest that we have here, that's a pretty cool stage too. So for instance, when I come home, he's crawling right now. And a lot of times you wonder how much the babies can think or how much they're able to process. And as soon as I walk in, he'll crawl as fast as he can to me. And he started doing that maybe about a week or 2 ago. And that's pretty special too. So it's hard to say because it's kind of each stage is my favorite stage, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I can't remember when they're babies. So maybe the baby stage is one that's so fun to work with, and it's cute, right? It's the cutest stage too.
It's pretty precious. Yeah, that would be heartwarming to have your kid crawling over to see you.
It is. It was really special. I took it back for a second.
Yeah. So you said that you come from a small family.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about your family growing up.
So my family is 2 kids. So my sister and I, and I'm the youngest. My sister and I are 11 years apart. So that's an interesting dynamic in itself just because of the age difference. So she was in high school when my earliest memories, and then she went off to college at Rick's. And so we love each other, we're close, we like to stay in communication with each other, but there's just that age gap and distance gap. And she was married when I was fairly young. I remember wearing the tuxedo. I think I was 8 or 9, and so she went off to Idaho and Utah, but my 2 parents grew up. My mom and dad were there in the home, and they raised us. My dad worked, and he was an artist / building manager of a gallery. He had it's hard to maintain a family just on an artist salary, so he did that to supplement. But his work was always geared to allow him to paint. So he ran the gallery, and therefore in his downtime he could paint. And then he can also show his work at the gallery at the same time.
Would he paint at the gallery or at home?
Yeah, he had a studio so it was a big cultural center, really big, 2 floors. It was an old warehouse from probably the 40s or 30s in the South Del Market district in San Francisco. And he had a studio upstairs, and I remember walking up these wooden stairs that there was nothing underneath. So it's kind of a little bit scary because if you were small enough, you could go between the stairs and just fall down. But I remember going up those stairs, and there was his studio, and he had paint everywhere. These plastic jars that had no label on them with a cap, and you would see 5 different colors that were dried over the side that would come out. And so those memories are always burnt in there.
Yeah.
While my mom stayed at home, most of the time. I mean, she did do some side work to help supplement, but she was always there. She always wanted to be there for us, especially because of whatever dangers I could get into running around San Francisco or something like that. So she wanted to be present there just in case I needed it. And for my sister too, she was able to do that for my sister too.
So a couple follow-up questions about that. Did you ever paint with your dad or get involved in painting?
Yeah, my dad he's a teacher too, and not an official teacher, but if anyone will listen, he would definitely teach them about the art. And so you have to be kind of mindful of your time frame. If you only have 5 minutes to talk, you can't start talking about art. You have to, hey, how's it going? If you have a couple hours, then you can sit down and talk about art. So that's a lot of what he would talk about. And there are times that I remember slightly painting, but those were usually in my earlier years, teenager years. It's like, nah, you kind of, distance yourself from it. You don't want to get too involved in it, or I don't know if resentment's the right word. So a question growing up that I never enjoyed, I would go to the art shows and they'd be like, oh, Tomas, we remember you, when you were this big. And that was one thing I always hated to be told. And the other thing was, do you paint like your dad? Or are you going to paint like your dad? Everyone asked me that. So for me, it was always like, how do I answer this? I don't know how to answer it because it's probably a no. But in that sense, even though I didn't like to paint, is because I didn't feel I could do it. My dad could walk up to a canvas with the paint in his hand and just start. I remember the sound of the brush against the canvas. I'll never forget that sound. And he could just go there and paint a painting, and it voila,
just appear.
It's there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to him, it was a spiritual journey for him. And so for me, since I didn't walk the same road he walked, I never understood that when I was young. I understand it now because we've had a lot of time to process and talk about stuff, and I realized the healing it had for him. But for me, mine is more simple. So it's just drawing. My kid's like, hey, can you draw me this? And I'll draw him a picture. So like, for instance, my daughter the other day was making a thing for her teacher, and her teacher likes the Giants. And she's like, can you draw the Giants logo? Can you draw the San Francisco 49ers logo? And so I did it for her. I didn't think it was great, but she's like, wow, thanks, Dad.
She was happy with it.
Yeah. So it's kind of more amateur. My sister is the one that's more the painter. She will paint some still life and some nice realistic pictures of different things that she, usually landmarks or fruit, something like that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways to be creative. Do you think that you pulled anything from your father's creativity?
For sure. Yeah, definitely. My creativity probably stems more around different things that I do. So what does that mean, right? So whatever I'm doing, I'll bring a creative side to it. So for instance, right now, what I do is teaching, and I try to think of ways to do it different or things that would be interesting, because the topic I teach can be very boring. It's computers. I remember taking that class and not enjoying it very much. And I know people are sitting there and not enjoying it very much. So how can I be creative to make this more interesting? Cooking, if I'm making something, I think about that and I get creative. If I'm doing something for anyone, basically, I just try to think of things that aren't always going to be the norm. And so in that way, I think I'm creative. And so what's cool about that, in my opinion, maybe other people don't think that, is people have a way of looking at something and I can kind of look at it from a different angle. So that's kind of how I use my creativity, is in that sense.
I love that. It probably makes it interesting for people you interact with.
Yeah, like my classes, I don't know if they're lying to me or not, but they say like they enjoyed it, right? And they're like, oh, he's funny, and they can't tell if I'm joking or not. That's the one thing that I use with my humor. They can't tell if I'm serious or joking.
Okay.
So it drives my kids crazy because it's like, is Dad serious or is he joking?
Can Stacy tell?
I think she can now, yeah. She can tell if I'm mad or joking or happy or sad, or she can read me fairly well.
How long have the two of you been married?
We got married in 2009, so the math on that I think is 15 years.
Tell me how you met her.
We met here in Chico. We met at there's a church here that people who are going to college can go to and kind of meet people their own age. So they're not just there with other families and get kind of lost that way. And so we went, and she was going there and I was going there, and we met that way through a mutual friend. The mutual friend, wonderful person, very funny, very easy going, and people always feel at ease with her. And we started hanging out as a group. And I had this impression to not really pursue her right away, just because I didn't think she would say yes to a date. So for about 6 months, I was just kind of like, what can I do to, ask this girl out? What's really funny though, and this, I'm going off track, but I remember, and I tell her this, I was in Walmart when I first moved here, and she was walking to Walmart, and I had seen her at church one time before. And when it was the old Walmart design too, before they redesigned it. And she was walking, I think, towards the DVDs. She would buy a DVD every Tuesday. And I was like thinking in my head, like, oh, I want to marry that girl. I remember having that thought. And I didn't think anything of it, because I was like, there's no way. There's no way that I can go on a date with her. So that was probably 6 months, a year before we even became friends.
Was it the fact that she was walking to the DVD section that encouraged you, that made you think, I want to marry her?
I don't know. Oh gosh, I remember she's wearing this purple shirt, and she had her long blonde hair, and she's wearing high heels, and she was just very beautiful to me at that time. But you see beautiful people on the street all the time, and so do I say I'm going to marry all of them that I walk by?
Right.
No, and I don't do that. Not very often, at least. Just kidding. So, but that was the first time I remember really seeing her, and I didn't think anything of it. And then the friendship began, and then I had to kind of work on myself for a time, I think. She's really an amazing gal, and her parents did a great job raising her and her brothers and sisters. And I just didn't feel like I was ready. And so I had to get ready physically. I wasn't in a good place physically. I wasn't in a good place spiritually, in a sense. And so I think I had a good 6 months to kind of work on those things. Not that I was perfect, or I'm still not perfect, right? I have a long way to go. But little by little, I was able to improve myself. I lost a lot of weight during that time, and finally, at about the holiday time, I finally got the courage or the nerve or whatever you want to call it, the impression that maybe ask her out. So we did, and I took her to the fanciest place I could think of, Taco Bell, on the Esplanade there. We went, and she was working for Reeve Woods at that time, Dr. Reeve and Dr. Woods, who maybe have done these interviews or will do these interviews. And we went to get lunch that week. She got one bean burrito. I didn't get anything because I was on my diet. And it was a 45-minute date. And it was fairly simple. So that was our first date.
And she went on a second one with you.
Yeah, she did. Yeah. She came to see me in the city with her friend, Allison. They both came to see me, and we just had a good time. And it wasn't anything romantic. It was just three friends hanging out. And then when we came back, we asked her out again. And we had, in Chico, there was a big storm, if you remember, when the power was out for like 3 or 4 days. And that was our second date. And I went to her house, and I didn't think it was going to get to a second date or a third date, but it kept kind of going and going. And my experience before with dating had always been not end well. It didn't ever end well. So I kind of had that anticipation already that it's not going to go well, just because it never had before. And she's very forgiving, very, very kind. Anyone who knows her would agree with that, with those words I'm stating.
So the two of you decided to stay in Chico. What appeals to you about Chico?
Chico is a great city. The only thing I don't like is the heat. So every time it gets hot here, like 100 in May or June, I'm like, we should move to the coast, Humboldt County or something like that. But for us, all of her family's here. So that's a plus. I can't believe how important it is to have family close. I know many people don't have that blessing. They have to move or whatever because of whatever circumstances, but how much of a blessing it is to have family close by that you can celebrate with, that if you need help, you can help each other. If you want to eat some good ribs or something, you can go and eat some good ribs. I had this surgery recently, and all the family is saying, "Hey, what can we do to help you?" And I wouldn't have that if I lived, in Texas or something like that, right? And so that's the biggest draw, is the family. But other than that, Chico's small. I like having the college in town, except for the traffic. It seems like, it has its problems, but as far as safety for the kids, it seems to be not too bad for safety, at least compared to where I grew up. It's a lot safer. So those are some things that I love about it. The people here are kind. I like there's a balance of politics. So it's not, to me, it doesn't seem one side or the other. It seems like there's a balance, and there's always these wars between the city council and shifting. And I think that's good to have a balance politically as well.
Yeah, some diversity there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your work. We'll start with what you do now. You said you teach computers, but there's a specific...
Yeah, it's more complicated.
Yeah, will you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, so I work teaching a software program that's really old. It was made in '96, and it's the California State Child Welfare System database. So anytime social workers work with families through the child welfare system, this is the system they use to document everything. So it's court, it's who the foster parents are, names, addresses, all of that information. So it's a very complicated system, and it's very old. And so I train people on how to use this.
And how did you get started in this type of job? Yeah.
Luckily, I think I was blessed enough to get it. So, for instance, I was working as a social worker for about 8-10 years. And I think I had applied to a position at UC Davis maybe a year or two prior to this, but didn't really think about it. Or else one of my colleagues or friends, Chelsea, she contacted me out of the blue. I don't know if it was from the application or if she just thought I was cool or what. But she contacted me and says, "Hey, do you want to start working as a part-time teacher?" And I was like, "Yeah, for sure. Like, that would be great." So we met very informally, and she said, "Okay, cool. You're going to get hired on." And the process is always a slow one, so it took about a year to get onboarded. But once I got onboarded, I started training a little bit. I would have to use vacation time to do my training. And so I had run out of vacation time, so I couldn't do any more training. And then the wonderful trainer before me, he retired. And he was great. He did it, I think, 20 years, and he retired. And so they needed someone to fill the void there. And they opened up the position. I applied to it. I didn't think I would get it, and I got it. And it's been a great blessing. It's one thing doing the job, and it's another thing teaching the job. And the experience I feel from it is that I'm teaching primarily new social workers. And so they have a lot of questions. The system of the child welfare system is so vast, it's impossible to learn. It took me about 5 to 8 years to learn it. And that's maybe 1/4 of it, not even the entire thing. And then as I've been teaching, I've been learning more and more about it. And so maybe now I know like 40% of it or something, right? But I'm able to impart this knowledge to them. But for me, you talked about how am I creative. Do I just go there and teach them the computer program like a robot, right? No, I don't. I'm going to sit there. I'm going to guide them through the process of what a social worker would think. So this is what you do. You get the call. You enter the information in. You start gathering the information you need to get, and you start thinking about our options, and then you use this program. And so I'm teaching them, in a sense, social worker 101 in addition to the computer program. And so for me, that's what keeps it interesting. That's what makes it creative, like you're saying.
Mm-hmm. What drew you to social work in the first place?
That's a hard question, because I had a whole bunch of different things I wanted to be growing up. And then I went to college. I never thought I could do college. It's like, in high school, it's just like, I don't like studying. I don't like reading. I don't like doing any of that. So how am I going to do college? I know I need to do it because I need to be able to provide for a family. But how do I do that? And so I just started simply by going to the community college, and I did that for 3 years. And I kind of just went step by step. But during that time, it was never like, I'm going to do social work. That was never the thought. at some point you have to kind of declare your major. So it's like, all right, what should I do? What should I do? And a relative of mine was doing social work. And they're like, oh, I did psychology, maybe that's something you can do. And I always thought psychology was interesting and therapy was interesting. So I was like, all right, I'll take psychology. And it was a very easy bachelor's degree to get. But you can't do much with a bachelor's in psychology. So everyone's like, well, what are you going to do next? What are you going to do next? And it's like, I don't know. And then I think I want to be a therapist. And then again, my relative, you should do social worker because you can do a therapist. You can be a therapist as a social worker. Okay, well, let me see if I can get into grad school. I didn't think I could get into grad school. I'll be honest, my GPA wasn't the best. And I got into Chico State. That's the only one I got into. Out of all the schools I applied to was Chico State. And what happened from that is, okay, well, what do you want to do as social worker? Now, in order to entice people to be child welfare workers, because not many people do, the feds use money to attract workers, and they'll actually pay for the schooling. So my problem is, how am I going to pay for grad school? Mm-hmm. And then this program, I found out about this program that they had. Title 4E is what it's called. And so I applied to it. I got in. And so my college was paid for. And so my roadmap was made for me, mm-hmm. in a sense. Most people who do that maybe don't stay very long. They get the money and they do their time and then go. I did, 8 years after I graduated, doing line work, adoptions, placement, court, drug court, mm-hmm. investigations. I did all of those. And then, so it just kind of, I fell into it. It fell into me. I don't know. I don't know if I was good at it. They say if you teach, you can't do. So maybe that's why I started teaching. I'm not sure. But it's interesting. The child welfare is so vast. So you could do anything as a line worker to a policymaker, to like what I'm doing now, which is where I train Northern California on this one program.
What did you find rewarding about being a social worker, and contrast that to what you find rewarding about being a teacher?
Yeah, those are good. I think the contrast is very similar, which is interesting, is working with people and helping them. And when you help people, I don't think you help people to the place that you're better than people. It's not that you're better than them and this is the way to be. You both kind of are learning from each other. And so that's kind of, for me, my experiences. I learned a lot by doing that job. And I have a couple of experiences that are really great from that time as a worker. And a couple of them is, working with the families that I worked with. Some families are successful, some are not. One that I like to share with people is that a family I was working with, you had a dad who was single. And a lot of times dads are overlooked. Because one, they're scary. Two, they're missing. Three, they're not held accountable. And a lot of times you work with the moms more. But this one time I got to work with a father. And what was interesting about that is that we were able to connect. It took us a couple of months to connect, but once we connected, it was interesting to see the progress he made and how rapidly the progress came. He was, I don't want to get too much into it, but he was able to do a complete 180 in his life. He was able to be independent. And long story short, he was able to get his kids back. And that experience for me was probably one of the coolest experiences because we did it together as a team. Not that I did anything great. I was just there for him to help him. But I just remember driving, and we were in the car driving, and he's like, Tomas, why are you going over the speed limit? You're a worker. You shouldn't be doing that. I'm like, oh, you're right. Sorry. And like, he would hold me in check too. Like, he felt comfortable enough to have that discussion. And what was rewarding about it is after he was done with his case, I had a youth that I was working with who was kind of going down the side that maybe, people don't want their kids to go down. And I called up this gentleman. I'm like, hey, can we come see you for an hour? And he's like, yeah. So we drove out there and talked to him. And he just sat down there and talked to him kind of like we are. And the youth could relate to him, right? He had been there. He wanted tattoos, and my guy had tattoos all over him, right? And my guy was the nicest guy, nicer than any people I met, intimidating than any other one else I met, but he was just full of love, and he was willing to share that with the kids. So those types of things were very special. We also had the opportunity I had a manager who was very willing to allow us to kind of be creative. And so I don't want to sit in front of a computer all day. That's not my thing. And so my friend and I, we were working with a lot of teenagers, and I was like, can we start doing this and this and that? And my manager was very open to it. And whatever I asked for, she's okay, cool. And then I connected with a wonderful lady from Fiscal who was able to make all my dreams come true as far as working with these kids. So we were able to fund, we got some funding to go down to San Francisco with the youth. We brought 4 youth down there. They had never left the county. And here we are driving downtown San Francisco, and we were in the van, and they're just looking up at the buildings. And then the professional, oh gosh, I don't know if this is appropriate to say, but the professional ladies were walking downtown, and they were like rolling down the window, and they're like, we never seen such pretty girls before. And we went to the Giants game, and they'd never been there. And I remember I tried to do things cheap, and the Fiscal lady's like, Tomas, you should buy him a sweater while you're there. You should buy him a hot dog. And I'm like, okay, sure. So we got to have that experience. One experience that's really cool about that is we were in line to buy a hot dog or nachos or garlic. I think garlic fries, right? That's what the Giants are known for, right? So we're in line, and someone dropped a $10 or a $20 bill behind them, and I'm in line with the youth. And this is actually the same youth that I brought to meet that one gentleman, and he wanted to take that money, right? That's a normal impulse. And we grabbed the money, and I don't remember the story exactly because it was so long ago, but he tapped him or I tapped him. I said, here's your money. And he's like, why did you do that? You could have kept that. And I said, well, what if I had dropped that? Wouldn't I want someone to give me that money back? And he's like, I never thought about that before. I learned something today. And he said it I don't think he was mocking me. He said it nonchalantly, but like for me, that was like, wow, maybe something is rubbing off on these kids. And that experience was awesome. We went to the hometown buffet afterwards. We tore up the desserts. I don't know if they had been to, but I think they actually, all of my foster youth that I worked with went to the buffet with me at least once, usually, at least the older ones. And that was kind of my thing. I was known as the buffet social worker. So, but that was a really special experience. We were able to paint a mural with some of the foster youth. We did that in Corning. Someone donated a wall to us, and we were able to do that. So those are kind of the things that I really appreciated working as the social worker. Now, as in contrast to my job now as the teaching, it's the same thing now. For me, I can tell when people are listening. I can tell when they're not listening. Usually they're doing phone or they're doing other things, right? And I can tell. But when people are actually listening and they're asking questions, and that might be to keep them from falling asleep, right? They might be asking the questions for that purpose. But I just pretend they're curious. But sometimes they'll say, okay, that was good. Thank you. You taught me a lot. Or, dang, you're a good teacher. Or those just remarks like that, I feel like I'm making some sort of difference. And like I said, I talk more than just a computer program. So sometimes when it comes to social worker, we're trained to really be unbiased. Now, I don't think anyone can be unbiased. I think you're always going to have some sort of bias. So we try to be real about that, like what are your own biases? And sometimes you're not aware of what they are, right? But in those instances, we've had a lot of conversations about what would you do in this scenario? What would you do in this scenario? And when people first start at this job, usually if they haven't grown up in that lifestyle, some of these things might be shocking, right? So I'll talk like, I don't say it as much anymore because I've grossed some people out, but when I first started training, especially Chico State, the people who helped me get the job, I still work with them and teach some of their students. Anyways, the first time I taught, I talked about how the laundry was done and there was this nice brown thing in the laundry afterwards, and it was a wonderful bug, which you can probably guess which, the bug you don't want, right? So I shared that, how I went into this nice home and I had these nice roaches in my socks. And if someone hasn't grown up in that lifestyle, that might be very abhorrent to them. And so helping them just to kind of consider like that people's lives may be different, and they can have some wide opening. I don't know the word, but their eyes get opened up and they're kind of become more accepting through some of the conversations we have, which to me is a very delightful thing to see. I guess sometimes they feel comfortable sharing things. Like sometimes we're very guarded in what we say, right? Because we're scared of retribution or losing our job or whatever it is. And, even sitting here, I have, ambitions because I want to be like, oh, am I saying the right thing, right? So I find in my classes, people feel that they're able to articulate things and sometimes unpopular ideas. And I'm surprised at some of the questions that I get, that sometimes these would be questions that maybe, how dare you ask that, right? And sometimes that's the response that some of the other students will give. Like, how, you can just see their faces like get mad. And to me, it's just like the question's there. Let's talk about it. And we don't have to get mad. We don't have to make it wrong about it. So that's something else that I like to take away from my work, is that people will tell me some of the issues they're having and how this helped them get resolved that and things of that nature.
Open up to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm curious how your experience in social work has influenced you as a dad.
It's hard. So when I first started having kids, I was worried about them going anywhere. So worried about them going to school, where am I going to a friend's house? So you kind of, and I think law enforcement kind of has the same thing too, where they're a little bit nervous because they see some crazy things. So that's one thing. I've kind of learned to kind of overcome that, but I still am aware. That's one thing. So the other thing that it does is also, to be honest, it makes me aware of all the bad things I do as a parent. So I'm like, because I know how a parent perhaps should be, right? And I don't think there's a perfect parent. I think we all make mistakes, but I'm really like, I notice everything I do wrong. And it's like, oh gosh, I'm messing up my kids. And they're probably going, yep, you are messing us up, Dad. So that's the other thing. The other thing though, those are the things that I would deem kind of negative. I do know how to handle certain situations. So like, for instance, if one of my kids, and again, my wife is better about all this stuff better than I am. So I don't mean to make that I'm an expert on anything, because I'm not. I struggle with my kids because we have so many and they all jump on me, right? And I fall down, especially with my knee. But for instance, one time one of my kids was having a really tough time and couldn't calm down. And I remember learning about reactive attachment disorder, how sometimes you need to only give one direction at a time, rather than give, go brush your teeth, go get your shoes, go clean your room. That's too much to process. So just one thing at a time. So kind of little things like that. One time I even got to call, I had a colleague who was a psychologist, PhD psychologist expert. And I called them and said, hey, what do you think about this? And so like, who gets to just call a child psychologist like that, right? And what was great about it, she reassured me that, you're doing okay, and don't lose all your faith. And I think as a parent, sometimes it's easy to think, and I don't know if everyone thinks the same way I do, but I think it's easy to think that you're making the wrong choice and you're messing up and you're doing the wrong thing. And for parents who think that way, that can be weigh very heavy on them. So hopefully my job, I can kind of say to myself, okay, you're not doing so bad. You're doing the best you can. And my wife is really good at uplifting that for me. Like if I'm just really down on myself, like, oh, I shouldn't have got mad, or I shouldn't have done this, or I shouldn't have yelled, or I shouldn't have whatever it is. She's like, okay, well, you also did this and you did that. And it's hard to make that juxtaposition of good, or what you're doing that you think is good versus doing what's wrong. And she uses this nurturing heart technique. So teachers know all about that. And she tries to do that with the kids, and the kids respond better than to the tough dad, don't do that, or go to your room, right? And so those are just some of the things that I picked up from my job that's helped me, or made it helpful or not so helpful being a parent.
Gives you something to work for, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Ways to be better. I think we all want to be better parents.
Oh,
so.
Yes. Yeah.
Will you tell us a little bit about your parents, where they come from, how they ended up in San Francisco?
Yeah, definitely. No, that's an interesting story. They're more cool than I am, for sure. My dad was born and raised in Guatemala, and when he grew up, in the 30s, that's when he was born, in the 30s, and he had the opportunity when he was 18 to lead a roof seller. He sold roofs, Don Atchison, and he talked very highly of these people, Don and Doña Atchison, and he's very grateful to them. And he got the opportunity to lead Don Atchison through Guatemala, Quetzaltenango. I think it was for a week. And during that time, he was impressed by my dad. My dad's very funny and fairly, I don't know if silly is the right word, but he's funny. Anyways, I think he took a liking to my dad, and my dad asked him, will you bring me to America? And this was when I think times were a little bit more informal. He said, I'm going to go to some other countries. I'll be back this way, and I'll pick you up. And his mom, I think, got him a couple $100. That's all she had. And he went to the United States with this gentleman, drove through Mexico, came up here. And I don't know how that worked crossing the border at that time, but he came through and went to San Diego. And I think they lived in San Diego and Utah. And so that's how he ended up here in America. My mother, her family joined our church probably in, I'm trying to think, 46, in probably the early 50s, I'm guessing. No, probably the late 40s. This is just after World War II. My mom was born right after World War II. My grandfather served in the Dutch army. They were overtaken by Germany hecka quick. And that was a really scary time for them. They didn't have food, so he would have to sneak out at night to get them food during the war. And I can't imagine that. Anyways, they joined the church, and at that time, and I don't know if it's like that now, but it was really hard to be a member. The missionaries were getting spit on, and they said it was hard for them to live the church there, so they decided to immigrate to the United States. So they came across the water, came to America. I think she was about 5, and they settled in Oregon, Eastern Oregon, and then my parents met in Utah. The common meeting place for people, and that's how they met. My mom was a nursing student, and my dad, I think, was attending school a little bit, but he was also doing security and janitorial and washing dishes. He was a hard worker. He had to work because he had to pay for everything on his own. So, but that's how they met, and then they connected, and I'm not exactly sure all the dates, but I think shortly after my sister was born is when they moved to San Francisco. So this is the time to be in San Francisco, late 60s, right? So if you see a picture of my mom and dad, I should try to find it. But my sister calls them, so you have like the beatniks, or there's the other one which is like beatniks, I can't remember. Bohemians, right? So, and then you have like, I don't think they ever went to like City Lights bookstore on downtown or anything like that, but since my father was an artist, my mother was into flamenco dancing, my dad plays Spanish guitar, they're hanging out with artists, 60s, 70s. I just can't imagine what that was like. And I'm not saying that it was this dream life, because they had a lot of difficulties which brought hardship and things like that. But that's how they ended up in San Francisco. My dad needed to be in a town that was an art town. So San Francisco is an art town, and so that's why they ended up there. So we had to live in San Francisco, basically, which it has pros and cons too. I loved it, but there was stuff that was interesting. So when we were actually talking on the phone, my mom was in the room, and I think I shared that like some parts of it was hard and growing up in there, and some parts of it was cool. And my mom's like, it was amazing in San Francisco. And it's like, yeah, it was, but there was also things that I didn't like about it. So that's how we ended up there.
Did you ever get to visit Guatemala or Holland?
I've never been to Holland. My sister just went. So we said to my sister, Marinka, you're going to the motherland. And I always hope to go there. I never have been there. But she went there this year and loved it. And she said all the people are tall like me. And the facial features look the same like my mom. And I thought that was interesting. I think... Yeah, I didn't know what to think about that. I thought it was really interesting, though, when she said that the facial features were the same. I've been to Guatemala. I made my dad take me. He would go there by himself. He would like to go every couple of years because his mom was still there and his brother was still there and his sister. And when I was 16, I think I was 16, I was a I was a junior in high school. I said, "You have to take me, please, 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 please." And he took me. And I was playing, I was just starting to play football there at the high school. And I went to this trip instead of doing football. So I basically did that instead of football. And I got to go to Guatemala. I went to the city. He's from Quetzaltenango, which is the second biggest town there. So that's where we spent most of our time. But he also took me to Antigua, which is the old Spanish city. He took me to Tikal, which is the Maya ruins. And for all the Star Wars fans, that's where they have the original shot of Star Wars there at the end. So I got to experience that and meet my grandmother for the first time at 16. I don't speak Spanish. She didn't speak English, but it was still a nice visit. And they cooked these wonderful tamales. Paches is what they're called, made out of rice flour, steamed in banana leaves. And that was probably the best food that I ever ate in my life. So not only did I have this trip where I'm meeting my family for the first time and I'm seeing the fatherland and I'm seeing the Maya ruins, which was a very spiritual experience, I'm also eating the most delicious food that I ever had in my life there.
That's fantastic. That's really fun. So you probably stay pretty busy, working, 6 kids, wife. You do volunteer work at your church.
Yeah, and coach.
And you're a coach. What advice would you give to other dads who maybe find themselves a little bit busy?
Oh, they probably got to come teach me. I'm the one that needs the lesson. I think to be patient with the kids, be patient with yourself. For me, being patient with myself is a big one. I get really hard on myself sometimes. One thing that I do like to try to do is spend time with the kids individually if I can. That's always hard to do, right? So I try to find ways to do that. And several ways that I have been able to do that is through, like you said, I serve in the church. So usually when you go to church appointments, usually you bring someone with you, kind of. That's kind of the cultural protocol or whatever. And I bring my kids with me. So we'll go and visit someone, and I'll bring usually it's one of my daughters because they're older, and they'll come with me. And so what I love about that, not only we're spending time together, they're also learning, 1, how to kind of deal with people, 2, to look for people's needs, and then 3, to just kind of give of the time. And I remember being a kid, and it's like, oh, we got to go see this person. My mom was a Relief Society president growing up, and she would always take me to her food orders. And it was such a drag when she would do that. But now as a parent, for me, it's like, wow, what a joy it is for me to do this thing that I didn't like with my mom, and now I like it. So my kids, I think my kids are the same. Like, oh, why is dad bringing us to this? But I can see them when their parents doing the same thing. It's kind of funny how we kind of mimic the way that we were raised. So that's one way I do it. The other way that I do it is coaching. So my kids play basketball is the main thing they play. And so I've been lucky for the past 3 years to be the coach for their teams. So then I have to be with them. What's great about coaching is that not only you're working with your own kid, but you're working with other kids, and you get to see the progress they make. And for me, I probably make more progress than I'm teaching them, because I don't teach them all. I just kind of keep them organized and make sure they don't hurt each other, right? And then make sure they show up to the games, and then they do everything else. But the fun it is to see these kids. I didn't really understand the joy that kids have and are until I kind of saw them all together on the basketball court. And that's one way that I do that. Other way, like I said, my kids like music. So my daughter and I got to go see Queen the other day. I can't believe my daughter loves classical rock. She likes hip hop. She likes all the music I like. She loves Taylor Swift more than I do, but I'm okay with Taylor Swift. But so like we've been looking for concerts to go to. So we went to Queen. We went to Fall Out Boy. And actually other members of our family like concerts too. So just trying to find activities that they're interested in. My sons love Pokemon, so we spend time. There's a great store here in town that we go to usually weekly if we can, and we go pick up a couple of cards there. So that's kind of one way that I do it, is by trying to find something that they're interested in, and hopefully I'm interested in everything I've been interested in so far. And then kind of doing that. My wife also does a good job kind of trying to gather us at least once a week to do something together. That one's hard though, because everyone's interests are different. You know, the baby's like, shooting Star Wars or shooting their Nerf guns the whole time, and the older kids don't want to be there. They want to be iPhoning or whatever it is that they do, right? And then dad's probably lost in La La Land somewhere. So it becomes hard to kind of do that, but my wife does a great job kind of bringing us together on that one.
Well, thank you so much for coming. It's been really enjoyable visiting with you, and we thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.